Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 11th episode of the Capital League Insight series of webinars. The topic for today's discussion is Megatrends, Global and Domestic. The current decade has begun with a major disruption in the form and shape of a global pandemic. The worst in terms of the number of people getting affected may be behind us, as vaccinations and immunity cover large parts of our population, or there may be more with new mutations of the virus, as we just learned yesterday. However, the fall of the pandemic on countries, businesses, and people has been the greatest global disruption in modern history. It has been like rebuilding a Formula One car, not in the pit booth, but as you hurtle around the track. World-renowned management consultant Peter Drucker said, "The greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence itself, but to act with yesterday's logic." And that is the challenge political and business leaders face in this hour of disruption. We are currently going through the fourth industrial revolution, which, unlike previous industrial revolutions, will see the lines blurred between the physical, digital, and biological spheres across all sectors, changing the way we live, work, and interact. It is already underway, and the pandemic has just catalyzed the speed and scale at which it is likely to unfold. The emergence of dynamic new technologies, coupled with megatrends like deglobalization, climate change, resource scarcity, convergence of digitalization and sustainability, adoption of artificial intelligence, changing demographics, China's growing ambition, among others, means that change is to be found everywhere, occurring simultaneously to create a whole new global order. So where will we be in 2030? What are the mega trends which are going to drive the new world order? What are the opportunities to look forward to and challenges to be mindful of as countries, businesses, and humanity prepares for these changes? The directions we take and the choices we make will have enormous and permanent impact on our lives, careers, businesses, and the world. So we shall focus on these mega trends and their likely impact in today's discussion, for which I would like to invite none other than the wizard of the financial services industry, Navneet Munot. Navneet is the new MD and CEO of HDFC Mutual Fund, having joined 10 months ago, after a stellar innings at SBI Mutual Fund and the Aditya Birla Group for more than 25 years. To address the topic for today, there is none better than him, who is not only an expert on macroeconomics, but also has an uncanny ability to analyze, connect, and present a big picture view of what could be the new world order in this decade. Thank you for joining us today, Navneet. Welcome.
Entirely my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Most welcome. So before we start, I would like everybody to know that we shall have a Q&A session towards the end, and request you all to type your questions in Q&A section and address it to the panelists. I'm sure you're going to have many. So Navneet, coming back, I always look forward to your year-end note titled Person of the Year. And I pulled out an old note of yours, which you had written in 2015. And for the benefit of our readers, I shall read out the last paragraph with your permission.
Sure.
So what he said was, in 1830s, the invention of steam engine, electric motor, and cheap iron led to the Industrial Revolution, which changed the way humanity lived. We are witnessing the eruption of pervasive forces born of the union of cognitive intelligence, computing power, and ubiquitous broadband. With a bank branch in every mobile phone, the branch on every corner might go where the phone booths went. Real estate agents may soon be endangered like travel agents with the advances in virtual reality. Driverless cars, battery technology, and ride sharing will change the face of transportation. Watch Silicon Valley and not Detroit to get a glimpse of its future. Will coal-fired mega power plants be replaced by solar farms in every neighborhood? Will AI-powered drones supplant delivery boys? Look beyond the price chart of Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency, and you would realize how the concept of the blockchain can lead to unthinkable solutions for a complex world. With exponential power of computing and connectivity, we are entering a period of extreme transformation. Shape up or ship out. DIET, as in DIET, standing for Distributed Intelligent Empowering Technology, is my person of the year. Standing ovation to that. So Navneet, pretty much what you predicted 6 years ago is playing out today. And the pandemic is expected to act as a catalyst for the start of a whole new global growth cycle, accelerating the mega trends that were already underway. So why don't you start by giving us a broad overview of your thoughts and vision?
Thank you so much, Rajul, for that kind introduction. Always a pleasure to be with you all. I've always been a big admirer of Capital League, not only because I think we were one of the early ones which were like a women-led organization. I mean, there's one IPO which has created quite a buzz about a women-led organization recently, but you've been a pioneer in more than one ways, and also for the thought leadership and your client centricity. So I've always been an admirer. It's always a pleasure to be with you and your clients. And you quoted this 2015 person of the year. And I must say this, that I don't know who said that the economists, I mean, for that matter, most of the market participants or the forecasters, so to say, do two things. One, they make a forecast, and then number two is they justify why their forecast didn't go right. Maybe I think I might have been pure lucky. Some of these things, turned out to be the way maybe I kind of envisaged. I think the important point there was how pervasive technology has become and the impact it's making on every individual. Because if you think about it, I mean, it was the late 19th century, early 20th century when we saw some of the biggest inventions. I think human beings started flying. I think we could talk to each other on telephone and telegraph and variety of innovations that happened in the medical science were absolutely path-breaking. In fact, if you compare some of the innovations that we are talking about are nowhere close to those innovations. So maybe medical science has progressed quite a bit. So I mean, we have moved ahead from MRI or CT scan, but X-ray was the real innovation. It gave you a way to kind of accelerate on that. So, but the difference this time is that it took several decades for humanity to get a telephone in their neighborhood. Till 20 years back, I mean, large part of the Indian population didn't have access to a basic telephone or a television. Even after several decades, a large part of the global population didn't have any access. This time it was very, very different. At 20 years back, I remember the pictures of Infosys boardroom when they did a video conferencing with their board globally. And it was like a miracle thing for us. And today we are doing it, right? I mean, a person on the street, 5,000 rupee phone is doing a video conferencing. So how pervasive it has become, how distributed, how intelligent, and how empowering. And now when you have the artificial intelligence and machine learning, they're progressing themselves, I think. So with very little intervention also, I think the pace of all the acceleration of that change has gone up quite a bit. The phone that we are using or I've dialed from iPad or maybe your phone today has more computing power than Apollo 11 that took man to the moon. The 18 sensors that every iPhone has got, I mean, whether it's a face recognition or the voice recognition, satellite imaging, I mean, you have the map on every phone. These things were a complete domain of maybe a NASA or a Pentagon or maybe an ISRO and some of these organizations, but not for usage by a person on the street. So this pervasiveness, this ubiquitous technology has made all the difference. When you give a title like mega trends, the expectations would be that I'm going to talk about artificial intelligence, machine learning, how to change the world. I'll talk about augmented reality, virtual reality. I'll talk about how social media is changing the world, and it's changing quite a bit. Some of the elections, I think, outcome in last few years has a lot to do what happened on the social media. And if you have not seen, I think that Netflix series on social media is a must watch, what it's doing to us. And of course, now the Mark Zuckerberg is talking about the metaverse. So you can imagine what we would be as human beings. I'm going to talk about mobility and what are the changes that it can bring on. One would expect I'll talk about quantum computing, because I think the whole Moore's law of the semiconductor, that speed will probably come to an end, and then we'll have to move to something else, which is the quantum computing, and a lot of work is happening on that. People would expect I'll talk about cloud, I'll talk about Internet of Things, which is such a mega trend. Imagine billions of devices interconnected and how they can change the things in a meaningful manner, impacting businesses, societies, lives, governments, so on and so forth. One would expect I'm going to talk about 3D printing and how the manufacturing will undergo a change. A lot of these names like fourth industrial revolution or the fourth, whatever, after the agriculture revolution, industrial, and the knowledge revolution, I would be expected of talking about maybe what's happening in the gaming and then the real life implications of that and the whole metaverse that I kind of talked about. But not necessarily, I'm not going to talk about most of these because you can Google and there are like thousands of books, if not more than hundreds of thousands on all of these mega trends. And I must mention this, that most of the people, and I think it was Bill Gates who said that we always overestimate what can happen in 1 year. We always overestimate what can happen in 1 year, but we always underestimate what can happen in 10 years. And I think there are a lot of these consultants, a lot of these, they do a great job and with full respect to them. And a lot of these experts, a lot of these futurists, a lot of these forecasters, put a lot of these forecasts, the trends for 2025, trends for next 10 year, 20 year, 30 year. I think there is this Gartner, which comes with 10 or 15 technology trends every year or something. And you go back in history, last 20, 30 years of that, nobody predicted something like an iPad or an iPhone, which is something that really changed as the kind of things which have become possible today. Nobody predicted that. And there are so many other things like a social media. Nobody predicted something like this would be there. There are so many of these changes that could not be predicted. I think more important, whether you are a business person or you are an investor or you are a student or part of the policy making. It's more about how do we kind of make sense of what's happening around us and how do we build that adaptability? How do we build resilience? How do we ensure that we don't get disrupted? We disrupt others when these changes are happening, because it's very, very difficult to really predict what is likely to happen. Now, I'll give you a classic example. Had we done this event in February, maybe I think I might have said that, but let's say end of 2019, and the mega trends for next 10 years, there is highly unlikely, in fact, almost impossible. I would have said that pandemic would be the biggest risk for the economy or for the markets or for the humankind. It's impossible. Nobody predicted it. There were few people, Bill Gates used to talk about it a little bit, that how big a risk is a pandemic if it spreads, but nobody could think like that. So more important is how do you kind of adjust to that. I'll talk about a couple of others, actually, the trends that I see and which have larger implications on us than the ones that I kind of outlined, and I'm sure everybody knows about it. We can discuss, by the way, all of them, some of these technological larger trends. So talked about that person of the year, and I think it was 2010. So I've been writing this person of the year for more than 15, 16 years. In fact, now as we are approaching December, you're putting pressure on me by reminding it to write this. I hope I'm able to pen down some thoughts. I remember, so it used to be called from 2003-4 when I started, I used to put it Man of the Year, because that's how, most of these magazines and papers, a lot of people used to write Man of the Year, and I used to write a Man of the Year. In 2010, while writing about it, I wrote that my Man of the Year or whatever, then I changed the name to Person of the Year, and it was very embarrassing. That is the rising power of women. And it wasn't about Sarah Palin or an Oprah Winfrey or Angela Merkel. I've been a big fan of her, or Nancy Pelosi, or it's about all the women leaders in India, Vinita Bali, or several of those ICICI leaders, or Renu Karnad, or maybe Mayawati, or Sheila Dikshit, or Sonia Gandhi, or it's nothing to do with those big leaders. But it was that it's a tidal wave. This is coming from planet Venus. And we are in a world, we are really in a VUCA world. VUCA stands for, as everybody knows, it's a cliche now, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And in this VUCA world, and for a variety of other things that are happening, is the best thing that could happen to the humankind, that women are rising everywhere, in business and society and in politics, everywhere. And I give you an example. The other day, I was talking to my my niece, she got an admission into Xavier's, into the Masters in Communication and Media. And I was generally asking, what's the gender ratio? And I was like surprised. She said there are 45 students, there are only 5 boys. Now think about it. It's like Xavier's, the upper end of, like, let's say, college when it comes to the humanities, particularly in the communication, media and all. You can visualize 20 years later, editors of most of the media houses are going to be women. I mean, this is just one example, and I can go on and on and on and on. And my view was that if a couple of decades later, if we find that the world is more peaceful, world is more prosperous, world is more pragmatic, then I think we have to give credit to the trend that women are rising everywhere. And I said that, and I said that this is not a, I mean, I used to call it man of the year, which I changed from that year. It's not a person of the year, but it's a person of the decade. It's a person of the century and a person of the millennium. And I wrote that every business must know, and there is this famous movie, What Do Women Want? And in financial services, we can discuss it later, the impact of women making a larger, in terms of larger play on the decision making, how to change things. And one of the reasons, it's not about a superiority of one gender against the other. It's just that in a VUCA world, somebody has an ability to think differently and multitasking, where women are inherently better and they are better in EQ, makes a lot of sense, I think, if organizations and society takes them. Similarly, I remember I think 2016, no, not 16, I think 17, when I had Elon Musk as the person of the year. It was very clear. It was not a view on the Tesla stock price. Maybe it was, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 billion dollars, nowhere in the top 500,000 companies in the US in terms of market cap. But it was this new age entrepreneurship, the audacity of the vision, where somebody says that if there is a problem on Earth, can we take the entire, the mankind to the Mars? Can we put a colony there, or can we have the hyperloop? Can we, how do we put an answer to the climate change, and can we move to a completely different form of energy? Or can we have private rockets in space? The audacity of a vision of, let's say, people like them, and how, we have seen a generation of those kind of entrepreneurs. Again, it's not a view on the stock price. Sometimes some of these things manifest, and people just kind of extrapolate that to the stock prices, which may not be right. And of course, there are two kinds of stocks now: one which are priceless and one which are valueless. But we won't get into that stock market debate. But I think, and my view is that I hope that India has these kind of entrepreneurs. And I think not many were there who are looking at what's the biggest problem with the society and how can we change that. Now we are seeing beginning of that, and that makes me extremely positive about future of India. I think you go to an IIT, go to an IIM, go to some of the other colleges and people, and see that how many people are choosing to be an entrepreneur or to work in a startup than, let's say, looking for a whatever 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 fixed job with a. And that reminds me of Nassim Taleb said there are 3 kinds of intoxication. You have drugs, you have carbohydrates, and third is a fixed monthly salary. So now we have people who don't have that and thinking different. That's a very, very big trend, and that's changing the world. These used to be the domain of the government or the, let's say, different kinds of organizations, where thinking about in the space, it will be done by the mankind, and I think it's a very, very different thing that we are seeing now. Of course, there are negative aspects to it. The whole debate on inequality, what repercussion it will have on policy and other things. We can discuss all of that. The another thing I must mention about these mega trends is that, as I've been repeating again and again, that people often get it completely wrong. What they think as a mega trend doesn't turn out to be that, because we have an ability. I think we have to give it to the human ingenuity over centuries or over millennia, that we always find solution to some of the biggest challenges that we have in front of us. I give a classic example of the early 20th century, where there are a lot of studies which recorded that the biggest challenge for the New York City was how are we going to deal with horse excreta or the horse manure? Because as people are getting richer, more and more people are taking horse carriages. It's creating a big traffic problem, number one. And how are we going to deal with the whole dealing with the excreta, because we didn't have maybe some of those systems that time. In a 10 years time, we had the automobile and there were no horse carriages there, completely different. But that was a bigger problem, but there's something else that happened. And I won't predict a lot of things because I'll have to eat the dust simply because I give you one or two examples. Watson, I mean, in whose name the Watson computer of IBM is there. He was one of the CEO of IBM, I think in 40s or 50s. And he said there could be a potential market for 5 computers in the world. And that's IBM CEO. And imagine, I mean, you would have 5 computers in your home today. The 20th Century Fox CEO once said that the TV is not going to last for more than 6 months in any household because people won't be able to sit in front of such an idiot box, or let's say something like a plastic box for long, and look at what happened on TV. And as I said that
underestimated.
Exactly. And everybody does it. I mean, that's why I said that more important is that, so where maybe Tesla started, but it may end up somewhere else. It's about the audacity of that entrepreneur, or let's say whether it's a policymaker, whether it's any, I mean, student, or in whichever part of life you are, I mean, just adapt to the change and think about it rather than trying to predict one big thing because you may end up somewhere else. So as I said, that I've talked about few, and maybe we can discuss a lot about technology, but I'll restrain myself to talk about 2 or 3 things. Maybe the pandemic is there, nobody really knows. Maybe politics a little bit, maybe policy a little bit, maybe a planet a little bit, just 3 or 4 P's. So again, first on the pandemic, nobody really knows. I mean, there are so many experts out there for last 2 years, and large number of them, again, as I said, had to eat the dust simply because, I mean, the only thing I would say is after reading yesterday about this new variant, what is that 1.1 point, I think 529 or something, the South African, because unprecedented amount of mutations in this spike protein gene, which is the target of most of the vaccines, and everybody is very, very concerned that this may have a much bigger potential to escape the prior immunity. So we really don't know. And the only thing I would say, the only certainty is continuity of uncertainty, and I leave it there. So nobody really knows. But I know that as I've been saying, that humanity has looked at several challenges. And every time, in fact, we can discuss that separately. And that's why I was so bullish last year in March, that it's a crisis which leads to a lot of innovations. And every crisis has turned out to be one of the biggest turning points for humanity. If you go back in history, if you look at the first or second decade of the century is so similar to the first, second decade of the last century. I mean, you had like the big pandemic, you had the First World War, you had like variety of challenges, but look at the innovations that happened. And this is not going to be any different. So that's on the pandemic. We can discuss more of the several implications that it will have on people. In fact, if you ask me, I think as health has assumed a center stage with it, the great resignation, that if you've been following what people are thinking differently about the work, about the world, about the relationships, about their health, variety of things, and this will have a lot of changes. But I've been in the camp. In fact, when I talk about the Indian economy, I'll use this word revenge consumption. I've been in the camp that it'll have some changes, but fundamentally, I mean, we are made for social interactions and not social distancing. We will go out, and no amount of Zoom call or YouTube or anything, I think that travel is only going to increase. Our interaction will only increase. So one needs to keep in mind, of course, I don't know, maybe a few more months. On the planet, I think people who are in Delhi, I don't have to talk much about it. You guys are known as like the chamber of India, if not the world. And like Australia lost 1 billion animals, 1 billion with B, last year in bushfires and all that. Polar caps are melting. If you've been following the Glasgow, I think it's very, very visible, the erratic weather events are increasing. It will have impact on agriculture, the way we do the agriculture. It will have impact on energy. It's going to transform. It will have impact on, I won't talk much about it because I'm in Glasgow last few days. There has been so much of debate. We can discuss more. I think particularly a few of the things that don't get talked about, I think the impact on farming and the food industry is going to be huge. How the policymakers will react. India has announced net zero by 2070. Not easy. We are a developing country. I think our per capita consumption is nowhere where it was like 150, 200 years back in US and Europe. So we cannot blindly follow what those countries are doing. We have to keep the larger social and the geo-economic conditions in mind as well. But the climate change is caused by, and I do these acronyms just so that I remember things, is caused by a couple of things. So coal, you have crude oil, car, which is like the transportation, chemicals, which are like ultimately the derivative of crude or whatever, but other chemicals as well. Chimneys, which is like the factories, cement or concrete, cows, which is like basically the whole animal farming. Actually, it is lesser known that animal farming is very, very big source of, it's probably as big, actually not as big, slightly lesser maybe, but I think it can increase because we are making a lot of progress on the transportation and energy side. So we may end up with like this becoming actually a bigger source of the GHG emissions. Computers actually. So we think that whatever we are doing today virtually, because I'm not flying, this event had you done in any place in Delhi, I would have flown and would have created a lot of carbon footprint. But actually what we are doing currently at hundreds of people, or whatever number of people who have joined, we are creating huge amount of carbon footprint. The one desktop computer takes some, and this is a UN recent study, some 240, 250 kilograms of fossil fuel. It takes some 22 kilos of chemicals, and it takes 1,500 liters of water to make one desktop computer. And the semiconductors, where there's a shortage of fab, I mean, millions of liters of ultra pure water is used every day. And the server farms, where like all of these things, if you're storing it, putting it on cloud, you have no idea of the carbon footprint of this. And people think that whatever, I mean, the technology. In fact, there's this song, Despacito, right? I mean, our kids listen to that, which has been viewed some tens of millions of times. That has created the same carbon footprint as 10,000 taxis flying in Delhi. So you can imagine that. If people are watching that video, of course, I mean, these companies claim that server farms are getting moved to more and more of renewable energy, etc. But just to give an example that there's no easy answer to this. Even the crypto, by the way, is extremely carbon intensive. The amount of computing power which it uses is extremely environment unfriendly. So the way it is put out by millennials, environment friendly, that's not the case. So the virtual economy actually is not a complete answer to the climate change. The real answer to me is going back where maybe our ancestors or the ancient Indian wisdom was, which was like go back to the circular economy. That's a C that we need to keep in mind. To go in coherence with the nature. I mean, nature is a great teacher. Everything that we are doing has to be in coherence with the way nature works, and being more content. That's like being Jain. We won't get there. That's the only way out.
Go hand in hand, going forward and going backwards, back to nature or back to ancestors. How will that happen?
So we'll have a lot of technological progress. We have been, look at the history of ours. I mean, we have always been able to harness the power of energy in some or the other form, right? How did we get into the plantation? How did we harness the energy of crude oil and that's where the factory and the steam engine and the motor that you talked about at the beginning came up. And we'll find another wave. I mean, the sun has more energy than, we can kind of like utilize for millions of years, but we need to find better ways of doing it and don't create bigger challenges. So obviously, as I said, it will change transportation in a meaningful manner. I mean, the electric cars would be a reality. The battery technology is improving at a very, very fast pace. Driverless cars or trucks would be a reality. In fact, I'm talking about, again, I'm saying that the bigger trend. So a few years back, when it was predicted, which job will completely get extinct was like the truck drivers or the car drivers. And you'll be surprised to know this actually, that the job which is in highest demand today is a truck drivers in US or a truck driver or a car driver in chauffeurs in UK. I mean, you're not getting that. So
Because
several
they're
times we
delivering
just
goods.
yeah,
Even
today and there is
home.
a massive shortage of some of those jobs. So they will get extended, but it'll take time. As I said, agriculture, it's extremely resource intensive, particularly the animal farming. I mean, the footprint of 1 kilogram of animal, I mean, the industrial farm meat is so high that I think we have to find a different way. There's a lot of work happening on the lab produced meat, and I'm sure we will make a lot of progress there in the next few years. But I think farming has to change very dramatically. All of this, I mean, the jobs, I think COVID has I mean, accelerated the shift of this new age of work. And because the way office work has been, it started in like the industrial revolution, where there were factories, there were like those swipe cards, you enter at a time, you exit at a time. The office was very similar. Factories had a large number of labor, but even the white collar or the blue collar, I think that they worked in a similar fashion, one on a machine and one on a ledger or a book. They were very similar, but I think pandemic has given an opportunity to change that. You might be reading about this whole great resignation wave, the whole, I think it'll gig workers, and it'll change the future of work in a meaningful manner. It'll evolve over a period of time, the work from home, work from office, and then, I mean, there are going to be multiple repercussions of that. A large part of the workforce which has not been in the productive field, like the women who leave, for some time, etc., they would be able to do something. On a very lighter note, for the employers, I always say, I mean, there's so much of debate happening between the work from home versus work from office. You have three kinds of people who can work from some, they are more productive at home or they are more productive at office. There are people who can work from anywhere, you call them anywhere. And there are people who can work from nowhere, you put them. You need to find a way to, like, how do you work with them? How do you motivate people? There'll be newer challenges in terms of cybersecurity. Variety of things will happen, and I'll just leave it there because there's so much of, these are hot topics. There's so much of debate that's keep happening. The other aspect, at the beginning, I said I won't talk too much about all of these technologies much because I'm just giving a glimpse of it, but everybody knows more than me, and there's so much of stuff available. But big data, artificial intelligence, I think machine learning, they will lead to, I mean, this word get used so much, singularity, where over a period of time, maybe another 10, 15 years, when machine becomes smarter than us, they become better and better. I mean, one can debate how can they become smarter than us because we are the ones who we will remain the master. But there are a lot of people who are predicting that machines will become far more smarter than us. But the implication will be on the job market or anything, is that anything which is dull, any job which is dull, which is dumb, which is dangerous, will be done by the machine. There's no doubt about it. So if human beings are doing anything which is dull, which is dumb, which is dangerous, I think will be done by the machine. I think there's no chess player in the world who can stand in front of a Watson computer. JP Morgan has hired hundreds of lawyers who do better drafting than human beings. Morningstar has hired like lots of analysts who are writing the fund reports for us. And somebody writing a report on SDFC equity fund, maybe a machine, not a human being. So this will create, I think, newer challenges in terms of cybersecurity, etc. In fact, talking about the trends, I'll only mention one thing about cyber.
Interrupt on this. So are the governments and institutions trying to reskill the labor force suitably? I mean, what kind of efforts are being put in? I mean, one is obviously full demand that, but you require a lot of institutional support to reskill, right?
It's not only about reskilling, I think reorienting them, the work is different than, or the gig workers are very different. How do you really put that? How do you also motivate them? How do you create that team camaraderie, which is like almost impossible if you are working from home? Maybe virtual reality is being used by several companies now to create maybe a slightly work-like environment, creating that water cooler or a cafeteria environment, but it's easier said than done. So a lot of things will happen over a period of time. But you rightly said that millions of people today, the job they are doing. But has it not been happening in past? I think it's always been happening. We don't realize it. And I think I'm not in the camp that large number of people will become unemployed. As I said, that there is more need for truck drivers than what people predicted 5-7 years back. But to give, maybe truck drivers, maybe that job may not be there 10-20 years later when everything will become driverless, but something else will be there. I mean, computerization is a classic case. In 90s, I remember every few weeks there used to be a strike among banks that when computers come, what will happen to our jobs? After that, BFSI sector has employed hundreds of thousands of people with computer and with, I think the entire automation, etc. So it will evolve. I mean, if somebody was a typist with a good speed, was like a great skill set. But I mean, let's say when the typewriters have gone, they've got deployed somewhere else. You have to constantly like reimagine your role continuously. So I think the even I think I
We have
keep
all
thinking about
become stenographers. We all can type on computers now.
sorry?
I
Exactly,
said now we all
absolutely.
have become stenographers, right? We're all typing all the
Yeah.
time.
So on the, I mean, we can go on these things. There is unending, things to discuss. We can take it later. I'll come to the other part, which is like maybe very relevant for the investors and for the people who are in business or profession on the policies. What has happened post 2008 and particularly post the pandemic. And my view has been that I think a new global reflation cycle has just started. And there is a difference between the policies that have been pursued, particularly post 2008 global financial crisis, and what has been pursued after this pandemic. So post 2008, I mean, it's been the central banks have been playing a bigger and bigger role in terms of managing any kind of crisis, economic crisis. So 2008 global financial crisis stemmed from, the had its genesis in US Fed, and then followed by almost every other central bank printed money. And in a year's time, I think things were kind of back to normal. The European crisis, again, the same thing. Mario Draghi came and said that we will do whatever it takes. And as if those PIGS countries suddenly from a completely, I mean, people thought they were almost bankrupt. And then, look at the bond yields, what happened to them. And then 2016, the crisis in the commodity market, and then China, etc., got solved so easily. So is the pandemic. But in last 10, 12 years, what has happened that every time they printed money, it created an asset inflation, but it did not create a real growth because it wasn't followed, or maybe it wasn't complemented by a couple of other policies which were needed to create real growth and to generate inflation in the world. And we have been in a deep deflationary, I mean, not a deep deflationary environment, but we have been in a period of like deflation or a more low to moderate inflation or a below target inflation for large number of central banks in the world for a very, very long time. I think this time it's changing. I think my view has been that inflation is coming. We can discuss more on that. And why I'm more positive on growth is this time it is not only a monetary stimulus, it is complemented with fiscal stimulus, then a lot of growth enhancing policies, which is like increasing the minimum wages, or build back better by Biden is spending on infrastructure, what Indian government has done on some of the reforms, etc., and all of that. And the fourth important thing is a lot of innovation, which COVID has accelerated. You put these four things together, this time makes me a little more positive about the global growth. It'll have a lot of other implications. The public debt in the world is at a record high. I mean, humanity has never seen this kind of the debt that we have seen this time. I mean, it can result in like ultimately manifest in two ways. I mean, either it can be a massive problem, or it could be an opportunity in a sense that what policymakers would try to do over the next several years or several decades is that there's a high amount of debt on the numerator. You have to bring down this public debt to GDP ratio. How will you bring it down? You won't be able to reduce that much. The way to reduce is work on the denominator, which is the nominal growth. Nominal growth is real growth plus inflation. So get inflation back, get higher growth by doing whatever you can do, and over a period of time bring down the debt to GDP, because in absolute terms they won't be able to bring it down, which will have its repercussion on commodities market. I think we are in a super cycle. We can discuss more on that, which means that savers will suffer. Now, there's been a massive loss of economic output in last 2 years, and which has been like completely underwritten by the governments and the policymakers. Either the RBI printed money or somebody else did it, but somebody's output got lost, and that has been underwritten by the policymakers. Now, that has to be paid back over a period of time. Who's going to take the biggest burden? Some bit everybody will take, but the biggest burden, that's an unfortunate part of it, will be taken by the savers. Savers will be paid less than what they really deserve, which means that policymakers globally will ensure that real rates remain negative. if the government is paying 6.5%, 7% on its debt, they will ensure that they are paying less than the inflation so that the debt to GDP keeps coming down, which is an unfortunate part for the savers. But then,
so Navneet, on that front, then that will be a question in everybody's mind, that what about their returns on investments and their retirement plans and all of those things. So what is your take on that? How would they mitigate kind of income streams?
No, sure. So, I mean, a lot of things will change with all of this. For example, as I said, that savers will be paying a price because real rates are likely to remain negative. In that case, you have to save more and invest more than what you thought actually to have the same kind of return. Also, the world is so uncertain that I mean, you don't know at what kind of, the sudden uncertainty or volatility comes in, which means that you need to have some emergency funds or need to hedge the left tail risk in statistics terms. If you do that, you are not going to get paid for it, right? I mean, the cash is going to burn holes because I think you'll be paid less than inflation. So, I mean, it won't protect your capital. It will actually exactly. It'll eat into your capital. So then in that case, you'll have to probably, again, as I said, save more. The bonds won't deliver too high real returns. Bonds won't give much return. If you buy gold, because in fact, we can discuss about it. I didn't come to my views on the politics. The world, I mean, the risk has increased very, very materially in last couple of quarters on the global geopolitics side. We can discuss more about it. In that case, if you do
talk about it.
Maybe I'll just complete this in a minute, this investment implication. So if you buy gold, which may be a little good diversification, but then gold doesn't earn anything, right? It brings down your overall earning component of your portfolio. And equities, again, highly likely that they remain relatively higher valued for a variety of reasons. We can discuss that. And also the composition of equity market is likely to change materially compared to what it has been in last 10 years. We were in a growth scarce world and there were few pockets of opportunity. And the money was chasing more and more of those opportunities, which gave a lot of polarization in the equity market globally as well as in India. As growth becomes more broad-based, rally becomes more broad-based, and then the nature of market changes quite a bit. Another implication one needs to keep in mind, and I've been saying, I mean, there are only two certainties in the world, death and taxes. I'm more sure about taxes because death, I think, maybe get extended a bit with in the medical science. Given the level of public debt, taxes will remain high. Government will keep finding more and more and more ways to tax individuals, particularly the rich, for two reasons. One is that there is a high public debt. Number two, the inequality in the society was rising, and pandemic has accelerated the inequality very substantially because the wealth is increasing with the asset price inflation and the incomes are not rising as much. Large number of people lost their jobs. To address both of these, the governments will tax rich more and more and more and more. So in your investing decisions, how do you do that? If you can reduce the churn, if you can defer the tax, I think that will make humongous amount of impact on your long-term wealth creation. I've been very positive on real estate for last 1 year, and we can discuss about it. Negative real rates in general is positive for, and this kind of liquidity is very positive for real estate. But I mean, these were some of the views on the market implications, but you were asking about the politics. So, I mean, before that, I'll give you a very 3-minute overview on India. I feel very positive about India. I think
keep in mind, we have only 15 minutes left. We can extend the session by maybe 10-15 minutes. So let's, look at
30 minutes. Yeah. So very quickly, I believe that global reflation is positive for India. RBI has been extremely growth friendly. So that's the second R. I wrote that note on 7 or 8 R. Let me remember some of them. And the reforms that have happened over the last few years are very, very growth friendly. The revenge consumption that I talked about will be good for the growth. The one was realigned geopolitics. The animosity towards China is good for India. The China +1 with PLI, etc., is good for India. Digitally redesigned world. I think India will be a leader in the new virtual world. There are tremendous possibilities for India. Return of real estate cycle, return of investment cycle, And I think the last was the resilience and resurgence of corporate India. A new profit cycle is just beginning. So I'm very, very positive on India. I can talk about a couple of risks. Crude oil goes to $100. Maybe the COVID third wave, I think, can really impact markets because people are not like kind of prepared for it. They could, if this time there is a COVID, the another wave, there would be impact on financial system as well. On the credit side, last 2 years it didn't impact much, so we need to keep in mind a lot of complacency on our own part. But the two risks that I think people need to keep in mind, whether you are an investor, whether you are a policymaker, whether you are a business or an entrepreneur, the two biggest risks to me. In next few years, the biggest risk to me is a policy error by the policymakers, particularly central banks and the fiscal authorities. We are in an uncharted territory. The kind of stimulus we have unleashed is absolutely unprecedented. We have never done what we have done. And we have been kind of increasing it every time. And we have now taken it to a level where it can, like, there could be two possibilities. One possibility is that like inflation has gone up and growth is coming back. Central banks and policymakers get, kind of like sure that growth is coming back and we need to take the punch bowl away and we need to start tapering or we need to start tightening. And it may probably be at a time where the consumer confidence and the business confidence hasn't reached a level where animal spirits are completely unleashed and they are a little early in taking the punch bowl away. Then we won't get the long cycle that I talked about. So that could be one error. The second error they can make is they're a little late in tightening. And it's a very tightrope walking for them. If you want to really take a grip on the market, just watch this aspect. Whether they're a little late or they are a little early, both sides can be quite damaging. And it's a tightrope walking. There is no clear answer to that. It's very, very difficult job that they've got themselves into. If they're a little late, then inflation will be like genie will be out of the bottle and they'll find it tough to control it. So there's a policy error that can have large implications on economy and markets. The second risk that investors need to keep in mind is the politics. The world politics is changing. There's no generation in the last several centuries who has lived more peacefully than our generation. We have been absolutely extraordinarily lucky over the last 25 years. The world has been so peaceful. I mean, I don't know whether our species is supposed to live so peacefully. I mean, because we have never lived. But some of the things that makes me a little nervous when you look at like Afghanistan, when you look at the South China Sea, when you look at like Xi's imperial ambitions and Taiwan and some of these things that makes me a little nervous. A new Cold War has just begun. This is the 40th anniversary, right? 1981, the fall of USSR and the Berlin Wall, 40th anniversary, yeah. And but I'm worried about a new Cold War. This will have a lot of negative implications. Nothing can happen in 10 years, something may happen in the next 6 months. And these things are almost impossible to predict, but it has to be there in your subconscious. The one positive aspect of this Cold War will be very similar to the previous Cold War. In the previous Cold War, we made significant scientific progresses. I mean, we sent man to the moon and we sent man to the space, US and USSR. This time between China and US and maybe the rest of the world and China and one side, we can move instead of 5G to 9G. We can have like AI and ML of a different level altogether. We can have made tremendous progress on variety of things. So it'll have some negative implications, but it'll have some positive implications as well. But that's a risk that one needs to keep in mind.
Great. So this is, I mean, you gave a positive view and then you talked about the risks which investors need to keep in mind. What about businesses? Currently we briefly touched on climate change, but there is a lot of resource crunch which is happening on account of climate change. And a lot of research has been produced that if the planet were to warm up by 1.5 degrees versus 2 degrees, then the likely outcomes are vastly different. And they're saying that 1.5 degrees we could probably could reach by 2030. So do you think the governments are doing enough, and what can businesses do? And when investors invest, then what can they look for, in the kind of companies they're looking at?
So always in my presentation, I used to quote like some of the risks that we need to keep in mind. And at any point in time, there could have been something to do with the crude oil or inflation or something to do with policy or something other. But the three or four, I think the bigger risks, which are generally not discussed when we discuss about the risk for any business. I mean, climate change that we have discussed quite a bit. It's a serious risk. It will have a lot of implications. We don't know how the policies will move, what kind of carbon tax can come up, and what could be other opportunities also. In fact, to me, this is like also a very, very big opportunity for several businesses as everything gets readjusted in the new world to deal with 1.5 degree, to keep the global warming to 1.5 degree by 2000, whatever, 30, 40, 50, 60. The other is I think on the rising inequality, as I keep saying that, it is a risk because it will manifest in terms of the political outcome. We are in a world where if you are rich, you get bailout. If you are rich, you get bailout. If you are poor, you get handout. If you are somewhere in the middle, you get left out. And there's an anger of middle class is manifesting in variety of ways globally. And I think even the businesses need to keep in mind, if you are not good for the planet, if you are not good for the people and society, you won't make profits. You need societal license to operate, and people must keep that aspect in mind, that how do you take society into consideration, and particularly the millennials and Gen Z, if they are your customers or if they are your employees, you need to keep these things in mind. You have to be good for the planet. You have to be good for people. If you are not, then you won't make profits. For sure, you can make profits for a short period, but the long-term societal license won't be available to you to the business. And the third, I think, is as we have talked so much about the disruption, is the lack of innovation in India, but it's changing, and it's changing fast. As I said that, when we were comparing Elon Musk with let's say the Indian entrepreneurs, that we spend very little on R&D, or we spend very little on innovation. For us, the innovation is jugaad. But that's not the real innovation. I think we need to focus on innovation. Several industries won't survive. Several professions won't survive in the current form. So everybody will have to evolve. So building more resilience in your business, focusing on risk management in a different way, which is like there is no Excel sheet which can predict a pandemic and your plant will be shut for 6 months. But the risk management has to be how do you build the feedback loop, building like different kind of resources, dealing with your people differently, like putting a lot more focus on R&D and also the relationship with the wider society. Some of these maybe 4 or 5 hours that I would recommend any business or a person or any entrepreneur to really focus on.
So do you think there will be coordinated global policy action on matters like climate, resource scarcity, equality, like you said, poverty alleviation, pandemic? Of course, there has been some coordination. Or would it be more the responsibility of businesses and societies to figure these things out?
And the lines are blurring. As I said, that if the entrepreneurs are now looking at conquering the space, or doing the things which have historically or hitherto been addressed by the governments. I mean, let's say who produce the vaccines, not the governments. I mean, it's a private sector, or who's finding they're addressing several challenges pertaining to the pandemic. Let's say we were able to converse this. We did a call with your clients last year in the thick of the pandemic, because I mean, some of these solutions came from the private sector, so that kind of line is blurring now. And I think everybody has to work together. It's a collective responsibility, whether it's to deal with and also historically, because I think the social media has changed quite a bit. So earlier, let's say if you were in a small village in Syria or somewhere, I mean, it didn't matter. You didn't know the world. I mean, you were in a small well. I mean, you were like a frog in the well. You didn't know. Today, when you are seeing the world on your fingertips, the aspirations of 6-7 billion people, and particularly the billions who have not got those fruits, are very different, and it's manifesting in a variety of ways. If you look at the political outcome in last few years, I think it doesn't know how to react, but it's reacting. That's what we know. I think this extreme polarization in politics, the nationalism or the tribalism, if I can say, in some parts of the world, is just a reflection of that pain that globalization was wonderful for the world as a whole, but the fruits have not been distributed fairly. So the people who got negatively impacted, they are making a noise, but they don't know whether to elect Trump or someone, and they ended up electing Trump as a result of their anger. But maybe I think it'll evolve over a period of time.
So in 10 years, we'll have nearly a billion more people, more population. So does that mean more urbanization, and what would be the challenges and opportunities with respect to that?
Actually, my view is I think we are getting to a peak. Unlikely, I think everywhere our fertility ratio is falling much faster than anybody who predicted. We won't reach the level that I think people are predicting for 2030, 40, 50, because education, particularly the girl education, changes things very, very dramatically. And we are seeing that in a very short period of time. By the way, I mean, if you take the India's map, the north of Vindhyas is where you have the demographic dividend. The south of Vindhyas is almost peaked. In fact, it started declining, and Kerala is going the Russia and Japan way. Tamil Nadu is almost moving there on the way to Europe. And I think maybe at some point in time with girl education, I think even the North will change. And so is the case with the rest of the world as well. So and also I think humanity.
China, who's promoting
the whole Marxist theory that we'll run out of food or anything, we've always found. I think our ability to harness energy for thousands of years has been like really great. We find ways to kind of deal with that. Urbanization also, I think, of course, it'll be, one would assume that, and we are like far behind relative to several countries in the world. So, I mean, we are at $2,000 per capita, and like maybe where US was in 40s, 50s, where UK was in 60s, where Japan was in early 70s, Korea, Taiwan in 80s, maybe China 15 years back, and you can see what happened there. A lot of things will happen, but we don't know actually how the humanity changes. Maybe with some of these technological changes, etc., you may like to live in Mussoorie and work better with clients and come for a week.
But you don't have the climate change in mind, where you have more floods and landslides and all of that too in all these situations. So everything is, getting interlinked at the end of it.
So I mean, who said this? I think it was William Arthur, that the pessimist complains about the wind, the optimist expects us to change, and the realist adjusts the sails. I think we have to be the realist always. So we have to keep adjusting to the newer reality, and that's the best lesson of history.
So Navneet, let me come to a hot topic of the day: crypto. There we haven't talked about it. So let's spend 2-3 minutes on that. There's been a lot of talk and discussion around crypto as a new asset class. Nearly 10.5 crore investors in India have invested as a medium of exchange, which obviously government does not want, and they want to come out with their own currency. And of course, then there is the blockchain technology, which can transform industry, part of it. So China has already banned crypto, and Indian government and RBI, I mean, maybe in this winter session, we'll have something. So what are your views on the dilemma facing the government as well as the investor on the other hand today?
So you read that paragraph from my 2015 letter where I talked about the blockchain as being like one of the biggest innovation of our times. It's as big as like internet. So my view is on the cryptocurrency, and again, I mean, there are different people who have been like very, very positive on that, on the future of that. But my view is that a medium of exchange and a store of value, if it's not under the control of a sovereign state, then what is the power of the sovereign state, right? It's the power to print currency is what gives you the power today. Would they lose it so easily? Highly unlikely. If that happens, and there's a possibility that happens, I don't know. If that happens, then we are thinking of a very different world, very, very different planet then. Because then there is no concept of a nation state, right? I mean, you're moving your money from anywhere to anywhere. You're moving your assets from buy to the NFT, from anywhere to anywhere. Then how do I tax? It changes things so dramatically that, because human brain thinks in a linear fashion, our ability to think non-linearly is very limited. It's very difficult to visualize that world. And that's why I keep thinking whether the nation state, along with the central banks, won't come with an answer like a digital central bank digital currency, CBDC. But the underlying technology is surely, I mean, the distributed digital ledger, I mean, the virtual security, it's open source. Every transaction leaves a footprint. There are a variety of applications, I mean, in terms of secure medical history, or as the IoT becomes bigger and bigger, where all devices are interconnected. It can play a big role in smart contract, any kind of contract. Forget about the currency, just a contract, right? So any kind of contract, it can play a very big role. And no intermediaries then is required, and everything is like open source, because it's very difficult to, because I mean, wherever there is an intermediary, there are some bit of like opportunities, but also challenges come. But it'll lead to a lot more decentralized finance, a decentralized or democratization of a lot of other things. That will happen. But currency, I'm not very sure in what form it'll survive, will thrive. Yeah, I'm not very sure of that. Yeah, because I mean, I'm not saying that it won't happen, but for me to visualize that it'll replace the way we know currency, the implications of that are much deeper than what people think about. Just the price movement on a day-to-day basis.
So are the governments
The,
and the
the
central banks
environmental
worried about
footprint,
that?
the environmental footprint of this. Imagine the amount of computing power it requires, that every coin mining and what it's, and every, like, the transaction, because you have those this stored in nodes within the blockchain network. The amount of computing power and the cloud storage that it needs is
that
crazy.
alone should be enough to deter it being accepted as a currency. I mean, China gave that.
So we shouldn't deter, because maybe the market forces will take care of that. There will be something else that will happen to put that into the right direction, I hope. Yeah.
Navneet, there is a question.
My fear is that, the way, whether it's a crypto or the NFT or the SPACs or, some of these IPOs or all the other gaming apps, etc. I think the more worried about like the newer generation, and it's kind of, I mean, investing is a new form of entertainment, and that makes me a little worried for them. It's a serious business.
Yeah, I mean, as long as they make money on this, it is entertainment, leading to more entertainment. Keeping fingers crossed that we move in the right direction intuitively. There is a question on privacy, that obviously our worlds will become more open, less private, and then the trend to track everything will only steepen. The amount of information collected on every person, product, organization is likely to grow exponentially. And the tools to analyze information will make decision making easier. Of course, I mean, that is a positive side of it, that it will be easier to choose products with lower carbon footprint or higher wages for employees or fewer toxic ingredients. But of course, it will take away, shatter privacy in the process. So how are, people and businesses and governments preparing for it, and will they come around to it? I mean, right now there is a lot of resistance from the public.
It's evolving, I think. So, I mean, it's a cliche that, I mean, if you are not paying for a service, then you are the product, and which is true. I mean, so your data footprint or whatever you are living is somebody else's probably. I mean, again, it's like it was somebody got the fossil fuel, or before that maybe a land, and now it's the data, which is the new oil. Actually, I call it the renewable energy. Data is not the new oil, because oil depletes and creates a carbon footprint. I mean, data is like multiple. The more data you have, the more valuable, with the network effect that you get. I'm sure these are like early days, just a decade or so. It will evolve over a period of time. The people who are willing to share that should get compensated in a manner that it will get, I mean, a new social contract will emerge between the footprint that you are living and somebody else is monetizing it. What should be the right way of monetizing that? It will evolve over a period of time, just like a lot of other barters that kind of, or a lot of other contracts that have evolved over millennia. This is like a little new thing. I mean, this whole contract between two people, that trust that you have, right? I mean, all the contracts are built on trust, and that's how the institutions got built, because somebody borrows and somebody lends, and that's how the banking and the trust is there. Institution got built over a period of time. Similarly, I think these things also will evolve. It takes several, I mean, maybe it won't take as like hundreds of years for some of those institutions to evolve. Maybe it will take a lot shorter, because the pace at which it's increasing. Banking wasn't available to large number of people on Earth till few decades back or few years back, despite being there for centuries. But this time it's like moving very fast. I'm sure answers will emerge, but I don't think that policymakers can do a lot, because I think there's a market forces will play a bigger role. And also I think it's a generational change for us. I think putting that data in public is like a little bit of hesitancy, but for the newer generation, it's a very different life that they started with.
So, Navneet, for investors, what are the opportunities which they should look at in new economy stocks, startups? The number of unicorns is just increasing at an accelerated pace by the day. At the same time, when some of these stocks are getting listed, they are at extremely high valuations, giving a lot of heartburn to people with the kind of volatility we are seeing. So, what would be your advice to investors on this front?
So some of these mega trends and extrapolating them into the sector returns or stock return, that's where the biggest mistakes actually happen. So if you've done this session 10, 15 years back and you asked me the single biggest mega trend in India, and I would say that increasing mobility, that 10 crore people are using mobile phone today, this number will go to 100 crores, and people are using data, and data will grow exponentially. And in that case, one would have thought telecom stocks are the best place to put money, and which was the case at that point in time. There was a prevailing wisdom, but rest is history. In 10 years, not a single, hardly any telecom company could make serious return on capital employed, and large number of them folded up. And I can give you multiple other examples. So in 90s, like internet was a big thing, the networking was a big thing. Cisco was the largest market cap company in the world. I haven't checked the number whether it has regained the same price. And networking has only grown. In fact, people would have underestimated the growth in the business probably, or in that of size of opportunity, but the stock hasn't reached the same level. Or Microsoft took 15 years. We were all using Office more. We were all using Windows more. But Microsoft stock price took like some 12, 13, 15 years to get back to the same price which it was in 2000. Or PetroChina was the largest market cap company in the world in 2007. But then something else has happened. So sometimes extrapolating these mega trends, and the story is part of every bull market. So the bull market starts with a stress, which is like a crisis. It begins, it gets its seeds or kind of grows when there is a stimulus, and that's where you should like really start with the big crisis is needed for a new bull market to begin, like last year 2020 or 91 or whatever, some of those, and then a stimulus comes. But the story part is what really magnifies a part of the market, and you have to be the most worried about the story part of it, because very few businesses actually are able to create the competitive advantage where they return the capital. It's very difficult, because whenever there's a large opportunity, large number of people are eyeing it, right? When people saw an opportunity in power sector, everybody wanted to be in power, everybody wanted to be in cement, everybody wanted to be in, we have seen those in real estate or so on and so forth. So if there's a large opportunity in this space, large number of people are also entering. And today you have a similar situation like late 90s, where it's about the eyeballs and the multiple of sales, etc. And there are three parts to it. You have content, you have community, and you have commerce. Large number of these businesses get the content part right. They get the community part right, but they don't get the commerce part right. So you have to be very selective, very choosy. I'm not saying you won't make money and don't look at them, because some of them will end up becoming giants. I think Amazon fell 94% between 99 and 2001, but ultimately turned out to be 100 or probably, 500,000 beggar a stock. But for one Amazon, there are 99 others who could not make it.
Yes. Yeah, that all investors need to keep in mind, that the success ratio may be very low for such companies, and more fall behind than ones which are successful.
Absolutely.
So what are traits, one could look at as advisors and as investors when we are looking at these businesses? What kind of traits or management practices or management style one should look out for?
As I said that, we have been in a world where size and stability was a virtue. It's still a virtue. But to me, the bigger virtue is the nimbleness and agility. And I always say this, it's very contrary to what Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger have taught us, that buy a great business, even if it is run by an idiot, because one day an idiot would be running it. They kind of exaggerate that to make a point. The business has to be great. My view, like in let's say, having seen whatever market I've seen in India, that management is the moat. It's the people who create that opportunity. And opportunities everywhere. We are at $2,000 per capita. As I said, we are where US was in 40s, 50s, and our journey is going to be very similar for next several decades. Similar in the sense that in terms of the growth opportunity. So there's opportunity in every sector, but it's a management who's like nimble and agile because you don't know the changes. Who could have predicted a pandemic and your plant will be shut, as I said, or I mean, if you were a lender that you won't get any of your EMI for a few months, were you prepared for it? I think those who are that, they can constantly keep taking advantage of the opportunities that will come our way. So how do you build resilience? Do you focus on risk management? How do you kind of build resources for the new world? How do you do the innovation and relationship? I think that's very, very critical with all stakeholders. So we moved in a world from a stockholder capitalism to a stakeholder capitalism. And that transition, large number of managements haven't got fully yet. This is a different world. Take care of planet and people before you think about the profit. Profit will follow, not the other way around.
And I think there is a balance which the managements have to bring in, because one, with the known knowns and the unknown knowns, they have to project for the future, maybe 5
The
10,
unknown
20 years
unknowns
ahead.
are the ones that, yeah.
Yes, and then you also have to keep in mind that a thing like pandemic can disrupt your business, and you have to be ready to tackle that as well. And how
Absolutely.
much resource allocation do you do to both? And survive, and not just survive, maybe thrive in the coming future.
And that's why people need you all to.
I mean, easier said than done.
Yeah.
So all the more difficult for you fund managers out there to back those managements and research those and find them for us.
And whatever disruptions we talk about,
people like you then take those individual risks.
Disruptions have always been there. I mean, go back and check last 50 years Sensex history and see like some of the mega caps, how they become, or the Nifties, how they kind of like go out of way and then somebody else comes in every few years. So disruption has always been there. It's not something like it's fancy to talk about today, all these disruptions, but I've seen like early 90s with the liberalization, what kind of disruption it caused in several industries. Large number of businesses didn't survive, and the new way, several businesses in IT, in pharma, in consumer, in media, so many of the newer sectors emerged. So that happens like every few years.
So Navneet, I think we should end now. I don't see any more questions. Do you have any closing remarks?
No, nothing. I mean, it's been a challenging time. I mean, but also, and then I mean, it has opened up so many opportunities for humankind in the last 18 months. It has tested our resilience. It has tested our resolve. But as I said, in every single crisis, go back in history, I think we've always come out winner. And I gave this analogy last year of 1665. I think Isaac Newton had to move out of London because there was a severe pandemic. And so he moved to a small hamlet somewhere. And because he was in a serene, peaceful environment with no disturbance and a daily job, that's where he came with some very, very big innovation. So that year was supposed to be Annus Horribilis, the year of horror. It turned out to be Annus Mirabilis, which is the year of wonder. And I wrote last year that 2020 or 21 would be very similar. It will be a year of thunder, but hopefully we'll remember it as a year of wonder as well.
That is fingers crossed. I mean, I hope it kind of spans out how you have put it across. Thank you so much, Navneet, for your time. And I'm sure everybody found the discussion very refreshing from generally what market talk we do. So we are moving towards a hotter, scarcer, and more transparent world. And our choices will matter a great deal as employees, customers, and investors, that we need to demand that the role of business, society, and governments lead us to a better and thriving future. So with that message, I thank everyone for your time on a Saturday morning. Thank you, Navneet, once again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a great weekend, everyone. And may I request you all to take 30 seconds to fill out the feedback form as we exit this webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks, Navneet. Bye.
Thank you.